The 1971 India-Pakistan war, fought half a century ago, it remains one of the very few post-World War II conflicts that have had a very distinct naval operation aspect. And I'll tell you how. It's possibly the only time that two opponents have deployed submarines. It rarely happens. And in a manner of speaking, it's actually had all the aspects of a classic naval campaign. And it's possibly one of the very few ones, as I mentioned, after the Second World War, to have this aspect of submarines hunting warships, warships targeting other warships, aircraft carriers, fighter jets operating from aircraft carriers, launching land attack missions. You had a very distinct covert maritime warfare aspect, again, that's not seen since the Second World War. All of these happened almost 50 years back, and it's remarkable how little we know of this, how unheralded a lot of these operations are. I primarily believe it's because the Navy is a silent service. It doesn't speak a lot about what it does. And I'm privileged to have with me today Vice Admiral Anup Singh, former Flag Officer commanding Eastern Naval Command. Admiral Anup Singh is one of the first batch of naval officers to have been commissioned after the 1971 war. He was in fact commissioned on the 1st of July 1973. He's held a lot of distinguished appointments, the most important of them being the commissioning commanding officer of the INS Delhi, which in 1997 was the largest principal surface combatant of the Indian Navy, and it's heralded a new era in the Indian Navy. He was the Flag Officer Eastern Naval Command in 2008?
2009.
2009. And after his retirement, he's written a very deeply researched book on the transformation of the Indian Navy from what it was in the 70s and the 80s into a blue water force. It's called Blue Waters Ahoy, covers the period between 2001 to 2011. Welcome, Admiral Anup Singh. It's such a pleasure to have you here to talk to us today about the 71 war, which I believe is the war that made the modern Indian Navy. Admiral Singh, first off, what is the importance of the 1971 war to the Indian Navy? How do you see that in terms of the watershed event that it was? The only conflict that the Navy has been an active part of.
First of all, thank you, Sandeep, for the introduction, and thank you also for reminding people that we are very modest. We are a silent service. But since you asked me a question, so I'm going to tell you what we did. I think 71 was the Navy's finest hour. And it was for two reasons. Firstly, the setback that we had received in 1965, having been denied participation, not active, but any participation. We were in fact told to huddle below the latitude of Porbandar, unheard of anywhere in naval warfare in the world, when we were a superior force compared to Pakistan Navy. And secondly, because we did not have sufficiently good platforms before 71. So the silent years between 65 and 71, as we call them, made up for a great transformational change of the Indian Navy. The first time that surface-to-surface missiles were inducted in this part of the world was in 1971 by about March to May, when 8 Osa-class missile boats were acquired from the Soviet Union. And that's another point that I wish to elaborate upon, that it was our good fortune, as General Cardozo said, God and good luck favored India. It was a good fortune that we were under the denial regime in the 60s. Up to 63, we were receiving everything from the British, starting with the Royal Indian Navy up to 1950 and beyond. And all of a sudden in 1964, the British said, look, our economy, as well as the fact that we are reducing our own navy and withdrawing from east of Suez, do not permit us to hand over or transfer any more vessels. And we went to the Americans and they gave us short shrift to say no, and we knew the reason because to them Pakistan was a strategic outpost and they did not want to have balance. That is the time that the Soviets approached us and said, look, we'll offer you anything for the Air Force, Navy, Army, whatever you want. And that was a godsend. Because of what we saw from the ringside in 1965, we asked the Soviets to equip us properly. And therefore, the transformation had started just before 71. And thereafter, from the lessons learned in 71, I think we achieved what we had never imagined.
Is it right to say, Admiral Singh, that the Soviet equipment that you got, the missile boats, for instance, we had nothing like those. And for all of you here, if you want to see what an Osa-class missile boat looks like, it's just outside. There's a beautiful painting of the missile attacks on Karachi out there. Do you think that the Soviet hardware that we got kind of changed our mindset as well, made us more aggressive in a sense that, you have this very staid Royal Navy trained Indian Navy and then suddenly becomes really aggressive, starts becoming silent but violent? Is that what you would call it?
Absolutely. All of a sudden after 1969, when we got the first Foxtrot class submarines, the Kalveri class from the Soviet Union, and particularly in early 71 when we got the Asa class missile boats, as I said, in this part of the world, that is the first time we got surface-to-surface missiles. The P series.
The P series. So this is something I want you to talk about. Now, not many people know the fact that the largest ship-to-ship missile engagements possibly in all of naval history happened right here in the Arabian Sea. On the night of December 4th, you had 3 Osa-class boats attacking the Pakistan Navy. They sank 1 destroyer, 1 minesweeper, and a merchant ship. So it's unparalleled in the history of naval warfare of the 20th century. Could you tell us more about that engagement?
Yes. I think first of all, we must give credit where it is due. No one but Charles Nanda, the chief of the naval staff, Admiral S.M. Nanda at that time, had this go in him. And he was hell-bent upon using these missile boats innovatively. Now, let me just give you a very interesting part of the story. That I visited the Soviet Union for each time for about 12 to 14 months in 1975 as navigator of the first SNR, as it was called. It was a missile corvette with P-20s, larger than the missile boats. And the first Veer-class missile corvette in 1986 as a CO. On both these occasions, the Soviet instructors specifically initially asked me, how did you think of towing the missile boats? Because their doctrines, which were taught to us when we got the missile boats, these are for coastal defense, and that's why their endurance range at maximum speed is only 160-70 miles. Karachi to Mumbai is 540 nautical miles. And nobody had ever thought, even in the Soviet Union, of using them offensively. So this idea struck with Admiral Nanda, and he kept it under wraps, only discussed it at CNC West. And by the way, there was a difference of opinion. And he went and told the Prime Minister after the Defense Minister to say, this is what I'm going to do, but I want no leakage whatsoever. And hats off to the polity of the time that there was total concurrence. Go ahead, Admiral. Now, this remained a totally secret operation. And 2 Petya-class corvettes towed these missile boats with nylon ropes those days. Now we use polypropylene ropes. And till that time, the British Admiralty itself used to use only steel wire ropes and chain cables for towing, irrespective of the size of the vessel. That is the first time we tried nylon ropes. How did this idea come? When these missile boats arrived in Calcutta, and that's another interesting part of the story, why Calcutta? In India, the only port that could lift with a crane of 200 tons capacity was Calcutta. So from all the way from Calcutta, they came to Bombay under tow to conserve engine hours. Now, there an experiment was carried out, and these officers who were on missile boats, they said, let's start using nylon ropes. And it was unthinkable, unimaginable for the Pakistanis. By the way, another interesting part of the story is that the Pakistan Navy were meant to acquire the Asa-class missile boats 2 years before us. But the deal didn't come through because they themselves said, why do we need missile boats of this kind? And when we got them, they felt that these missile boats will be used outside Bombay Harbor to attack convoys or to carry out attack at any Pakistani surface navy warship coming in. And they, in any case, they used to follow the doctrine of citadel control around Karachi because they didn't have enough of a navy.
So the boats were acquired post the 1965 war, where
That's
the Pakistan Navy
That's
attacked
right.
Oka, as in
Yes.
Dwarka.
Yes, Dwarka. When
So
a
this
cow
was a
and
defensive thing.
when the only casualties were a cow in Dwarka and one hutment and one fuel tank which the Navy had created for itself. Unfortunately, none of our ships, nor did we think of having AK guns in Dwarka. But it was quite an embarrassing situation because the reputation and the morale of the Navy really took a hard hit. And the Chief of Naval Staff at that time, Admiral Soman, went twice to the Defense Minister, Mr. Chavan, and once finally to Mr. Shastri. And thereafter, when Mr. Shastri also did not agree, he requested permission to go to the Supreme Commander. And he said there is no need, because what was in the minds of Prime Minister Shastri at that time was, let us keep it a localized confrontation, not even a conflict. He didn't want to expand, didn't realize that the Navy is not merchant Navy. It is a war-fighting Navy. So I jocularly always say that the Army and Air Force were not playing gulli danda. They were also in war. And therefore the Navy should have been allowed to go in with such superiority with guns as compared to the Pakistan Navy.
So in 1971, it's very interesting that how you have 3 maritime theaters. You have the Western Theater,
Yes.
you have the Eastern Theater in the Bay of Bengal, and you have a covert maritime theater which has
yes.
begun in April.
That's
Where they're
right.
training the Mukti Bahini naval commandos.
That's right.
How did the Navy, come up with such an exploit? From completely sitting out of the conflict in 1965, you suddenly go all out. How did you manage this multiple thing of 3 fronts? A 3-front campaign. It's incredible. With such a small Navy, how did that happen?
Once again, let me throw all credit to Admiral Charles Nanda. All his brainchild. But there were 2 other personalities of the time. One was Admiral Mickey Roy, who was a captain and director of naval intelligence. His counterpart in the army was a major general, but he used to have fully convinced of cooperative attitude. He used to go and chat with his counterparts in the army and air force, but kept this third part that you mentioned, on which you've written a beautiful book, Operation X. He did not allow anybody other than the Chief of Naval Staff to get wind of it. And the CNS, being what he was, he immediately grabbed the opportunity and he said, just go the whole hog, but keep it under real wraps. And that's how Plassey came about all over again after 2 centuries of history. That's how Captain Samant, who was picked up, the right person temperamentally and in psychological thinking. And that's how those divers like Commander Kapil, who stays in Noida, he was a young lieutenant, Aku Roy, who was an Alizé man, and the others. But the most important thing around which Operation X and Force Alpha revolved, particularly Operation X, was the nucleus comprising of 8 submariners of the Pakistan Navy who were Bengalis, who were standing by on Mangro, the 3rd Daphne-class submarine yet to be commissioned in Toulon in France, who escaped from the submarine when they heard of the massacres of their kin and other Bengalis by the thousands in March of 71. They escaped, first tried to go to Geneva, I think, and then finally came to Madrid and then caught up with the Indian Shahzad affairs, Gurdeep Bedi, was he?
Yes.
Who enabled, after talking quietly to the Ministry of External Affairs, their passage to India under remade papers.
Right. So one aspect of this, of the naval campaign, which we don't really talk a lot about, and in fact it's there in the naval doctrine, is this concept of commerce destruction. Guerre de course, it's called guerre de course, which is when you attack an enemy's merchant shipping out at sea or in ports, in harbors, the idea being that you attack the enemy's lines of commerce and you influence the battle on land. And this is nothing new. I mean, it's been happening for centuries, thousands of years. It's happened during the American War of Independence, during the Second World War, where you had the Nazi U-boats trying to cut Britain's lines of communications. And here you have the Indian Navy doing exactly this in the 1971 war on both the Western Maritime Theater with Pakistan, mainland Pakistan, and on the Eastern Front. Can you tell us a bit more about this maritime blockade? Did we have a blockade as such? I know the divers in East Pakistan were targeting merchant shipping.
Yes.
How was this whole thing reconciled? There was a thought process on destroying maritime commerce?
The first aim of the Navy was commodity denial, as you just said, guerre de course. Because this is an age-old strategy, and in naval warfare, that is the first thing that is thought of. For example, in 2006 in Beirut, in Lebanon, the Israelis, the first thing they did one day before sending their F-16s and their warships was to declare a blockade, 60 miles by 35 miles, outside Beirut harbor. And therefore, not even an American warship who were the best allies of the Israelis could enter any line of blockade without seeking permission from a young woman officer, I remember, of the Israeli Navy, who was on most of the time on call.
Admiral Singh was the fleet commander of the Western Fleet. Operation Sukoon in 2006, one of the largest lifts of Indians who were stranded there in the middle of this war. So that's how he has this very unique perspective.
And this, by the way, the Israeli blockade is a classical blockade because it was most effective. The principle in blockade, even though it is part of customary international maritime law, is that it must be effective. Now it has been codified to say, unless a blockade is effective, it will not be accepted. And the opposite of this is a paper blockade. So Pakistan, as would be his wont, and because of its lack of capability, declared a paper blockade. Didn't call it a paper blockade. It said, so many hundreds of miles around Bombay is blockaded. Now, nobody, not even Papua New Guinea, would be convinced that Pakistan Navy could come down all the way, even with one ship, in order to enforce a blockade. And the whole principle behind blockade is commodity denial, guerre de course, so that commodities and even exports are denied to the enemy. Now, we declared a blockade.
On the West?
On the West, on the fourth morning, 12 hours after our counter-air attacks took place on our airfields. By fourth evening, we had taken our words back. We rescinded on the order.
Why did that happen?
That is because there was conviction in the minds of the Pakistanis, who were the initiators of the war, as well as the Indian government, that we should not declare war. Because then there are too many international pressures, there is a problem in the UNSC and so on and so forth, even though history, which was yet to come 1 week later, told us 3 days later, on the 5th, told us that the Soviets are really friends in need, and because of the Treaty of March 71, the Soviets vetoed an American and a Spanish initiated resolution, twice on the same day on the 5th, which asked for a ceasefire and asked India to pull back. And that's how we continued with the war till surrender. Now, this commodity denial business, when we did not want to declare a blockade because of the political apprehensions in the political establishment, that we should not declare a war. Pakistan also didn't want to declare a war. We therefore executed what is called contraband control, which means contraband of war, without issuing a list what is included in contraband. Anything that we thought, even carried by a neutral ship, even though strictly speaking, neutral ships are not supposed to be attacked in contraband control or blockade. But we said we will first investigate. So some neutral ships who were carrying military hardware were also arrested. 4 ships, one in the western coast, Madhumati, belonging to Pakistan, which had overpainted its name as Adamant, and 3 ships on the eastern seaboard, heading towards Chittagong for the Eastern Army, Eastern Pakistani Army, they were captured by us as prize of war. And interestingly, one of them came back to the Navy, that was Madhumati. But the other three, Pasni and I don't remember the two names, they were initially handled by the SCI for about 6-7 months, and thereafter the government of India handed them over as a goodwill gesture to the new government of Bangladesh to say you can use them.
So this is a very important point you're making. The fact that naval operations don't happen in isolation. They influence the land battle in a sense. Your discourse. You're doing something that, for instance, it was calculated during the Second World War that if a U-boat, for instance, knocked out a merchant ship that was carrying arms and ammunition and equipment, the land forces would not have to face those many tanks and warships and ammunition and all that. So in a sense, you're influencing the land battle, and this is what you were doing in 71.
Absolutely.
And is that the primary goal of the Navy in a war? Is that the big picture that you had in 71?
It is. It is in any naval war, particularly when you are fighting a neighbor which is co-located with you on land borders and contiguous at sea, unlike China, which is on the other side in the Pacific. And even to China, by the way, since 80% of its commodities pass through the Indian Ocean and almost 65 to 70% of its exports pass through the Indian Ocean, is very worried, and that's why Hu Jintao claimed in 2004 that they suffered the Malacca dilemma. Even though the Chinese keep denying it till this day, but it is published point. And the fact is that they know that even though the Indian Navy is less than 1/3 of their size insofar as numericals are concerned, but they know that their vulnerability lies in the Achilles heel in the Indian Ocean. So that was our primary aim, to say deny commodities. A very important point in this question that you asked is that look at geography. So was it Kaplan who said revenge of geography?
That's right.
But we call it advantage of geography insofar as India is concerned. Look at our peninsula, the second largest in the world at 5,000 kilometers of coastline, 2.2 million square kilometers of land area, and look at our 15,000 kilometers of land border, which is no good to man or beast, basically because of terrain, except with friendly Nepal, Bangladesh and Bhutan and Myanmar. So you cannot transact any economic engagement or business or commerce across the land borders with China in any case because of our relations, or with Pakistan. And for that matter, with Afghanistan, you have to go through circuitous routes. Therefore, our peninsula offers us today 200 plus ports, out of which 60 are being used for overseas trade. And you can easily call India an island nation because of this benefit, because in any case, your land borders can't be used for economic engagement. Also because of economies of scale. So, what we gain out of geography, unfortunately, Pakistan, because of its geography, does not even possess 1% of that benefit, because the only port on which it has to survive for imports and exports is Karachi and Port Qasim next door. Gwadar has its own problems, but of course the Chinese will benefit more than the Pakistanis.
So
therefore, if you blockade Karachi, you smother the lifeblood of Pakistan. And that's why we wanted the blockade, but somehow it was rescinded, and we carried out contraband control. The effect is the same.
So I just got this press release saying that the second phase of the Malabar exercise are going to happen in a few days from now, where you're going to have American warships exercising with the Indian Navy. Now that's not what it was like in 1971, where you had the USS Enterprise, the carrier battle group that was sent in to kind of, it was a classic case of gunboat diplomacy. Could you tell us a little more about that? What were the Americans doing in 71? They were not very friendly then. What was the impact on the Navy? How did you see the geopolitics shaping up at that time?
You know, Ken Booth and James Cable are two authors who were not naval officers ever and wrote beautiful books on naval diplomacy. And you just hit the nail on the head, calling it gunboat diplomacy by enterprise, by the Americans. The geopolitics behind this incident is what needs to be focused on. I think it was a classic case of being assisted by a trusted friend rather than being a military ally, the Soviet Union. And we sealed the deal in March of 71 with the peace of friendship and amity or cooperation or whatever. And the Soviets promised that if your worry is China, they told Indira Gandhi at the highest level, then you don't have to worry. We will make sure that diversion of focus and attention is created in the plains by us, whether it is Ussuri River or somewhere else. And therefore, we were very confident. What was behind sending the Enterprise? And what was the date that the Enterprise came? The Enterprise crossed the Malacca Strait on the 14th of December, 48 hours before the surrender where 93,000 prisoners of war took place. But the Pakistanis were frustrated and panicking in the West to say, why is it the Americans are not keeping their treaty promise, which was a secret treaty, signed by the way, by President Kennedy, not because of his own thought process, but because of a bilateral treaty of cooperation under CENTO? Yes, not Seattle, CENTO. Preceded by the Baghdad Pact, wherein the Pakistanis sought their pound of flesh by asking America to stand by them if India ever is the aggressor. So even though this treaty was signed in 1962, this part of the clause of the bilateral cooperation treaty of 1959 under the CENTO, it remained a secret clause. Now, you know that President Nixon and Henry Kissinger had no love lost with the then Prime Minister of India and no love lost for Indians. And they used all kinds of language which I can't even use over here, which you can Google search and find it's all been declassified now by the Americans as to what kind of language, unpardonable language. And so what was it? It was because of that pressure from Pakistan that the Americans and Richard Nixon in particular made a message through the Shaza affairs of the Soviets in Washington, because the ambassador had gone for consultations to Moscow to find out what is going to be done to India, and said that, look, we have a secret treaty, which I am now revealing, since 1962, to assist Pakistan in every possible way if India is the aggressor. And therefore, we decided to send Task Force 74, which will be out of the Pacific Fleet, comprising of USS Enterprise and 7 other large ships. And these are going to go into the Bay of Bengal. So we are keeping you forewarned, also because we don't want the Cold War to go in a different direction. Right. But it would be better if you are kept informed, and also we would like your cooperation in the UN to somehow assist in a ceasefire. Now that's the story behind geopolitics. Now look at what the Soviets did. There's a man whose name is hardly known in India, except through Google now. There was a naval admiral called Krugliakov, who was the boss of the 10th battle fleet from the Pacific of Kamchatka. He was ordered to take his battle group into the Bay of Bengal, well before the Enterprise. And the Soviets always had, because they didn't have Diego Garcia kind of a base, they always had a flotilla in the Indian Ocean. So another flotilla was already coming in, which entered the Malacca Strait on the 7th, 7 days before the Enterprise came in, to replace the existing Soviet Indian Ocean flotilla. It was asked to stay put there. And then Krugliakov comes in along with some nuclear-powered submarines and puts pressure. So where did the Enterprise go? Not into the Bay of Bengal. The Americans tried to put an excuse that actually this force is going to evacuate American citizens, which are only 75, including the embassy staff, which we people knew that the British task force, which was leaving the Indian Ocean, had already carried with them. Second, they tried to show to the Pakistanis that they will evacuate 90,000 plus troops. And the total that they could have ever carried was not more than 2,000 to 3,000 troops for a long voyage. So we knew, and that's why Prime Minister Indira Gandhi demonstrated absolute poise insofar as this incident.
You know, Dr. Kissinger had come to Mumbai in 1996, around the time when you were doing your INS Delhi shakedowns. And he was asked this question. He said, why did you send the 7th Fleet? I mean, this is the first question you would ask, any Indian would ask Henry Kissinger was, why did you send the 7th Fleet? And he said something very interesting, that it was not so much to signal to India about East Pakistan, but it was to signal that don't move in the West.
West, you are absolutely right.
Do you think that's
Yes,
what was
it is true.
the plan was?
It is true. There is a compendium of very, very useful and very interesting memoirs written by Admiral Zumwalt, who was the youngest ever chief of naval operations of the US Navy at that time, by, I think the name was Dobrynin, who was the Soviet ambassador in Moscow, in Washington. Ambassador Pegov used to be the Soviet ambassador in New Delhi. And one most important memoirs, what actually chronicles which were declassified after 30 years, are of something called the WAG, Washington Action Group - India Pakistan. On wherever there were problems in any theater in the world, the Americans used to have an action group. Right. So Washington Action Group India Pakistan met almost twice a day as the war started. And Henry Kissinger as NSA, apart from being Secretary of State, and there was a famous man called Ambassador Johnson, who was an expert on international maritime law, and 2-3 other people I can't recall. They used to sit together and discuss. The first thing that Henry Kissinger said is, one of our merchant ships has been strafed in Karachi. How the hell did the Indians implement a blockade without declaring it? So Ambassador Johnson told him, look, they lifted the blockade. And now they say that they are doing contraband control. But this had nothing to do with it. It is the Indian Air Force which came and strafed ships inside Karachi port.
Right.
And we can't really. So they insisted that we must protest. By the time the protest came, the war was over. And the most important thing is that Admiral Zumwalt, in his memoirs, a very interesting book called On Watch, writes that he was not kept in the loop by the Washington Action Group.
Admiral Zumwalt is the fleet
He
commander.
was the CNO, Chief of Naval Operations. Those days they didn't have the Goldwater-Nichols Act as yet, and there were no theater commands, even though there was a Pacific Fleet and a Pacific Command. Now, he says that I could guess that it is to put pressure on India, but the most important thing that Henry Kissinger said in the Washington Action Group on India-Pakistan was that, look, it is now almost certain that East Pakistan will become an independent nation. We somehow have to stop further embarrassment and destruction of their troops in East Pakistan. But most importantly, we don't want West Pakistan to become a vassal state of India and disintegrate. Because now that their task is over, India is likely to shift at least the para brigades, etc., or airborne troops to the West, and start capturing J&K, which was occupied, that part of J&K which was occupied by them in Gilgit-Baltistan, but also capture more territory for further concessions to say now you have nothing left.
Right.
So that was the main reason why Kissinger and Richard Nixon panicked and they sent the thing. But of course, they, you know that the Enterprise never went north of the latitude of Malacca. They didn't even cross the latitude of Andaman Nicobar, even though the whole idea of signaling was to go there because of the geopolitics of the day and the Soviet fleet. So they went towards Sri Lanka and kept doing figure of eights over there.
So it's fascinating what you say, because you know when we talk about the 1971 war, it's very focused on the land theater and the air theater, and you've actually zoomed it out to the big, given us the bigger picture that there were other forces at play. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that was going on, especially between the Soviet Union and the United States. What is the collective impact of all of this on the Indian Navy itself? How did the 1971 war shaped the Indian Navy? I mean, given the fact that you deployed extensively across theaters, when you joined the Navy in 1973, what was the distilled essence of the 1971 war for the Navy?
As I said in the beginning, it was the finest hour, and it went beyond our imaginations. Not because the Pakistanis couldn't do a thing. We always knew that the Pakistanis, being a lesser force and having only one port, would only deploy sea denial strategies. And that is the reason, giving the devil its due, I must say, that the Pakistan Navy of the time had, if it had one very important and critical strength, it was their submarine force. They had on lease, under hot transfer, a trench-class fleet submarine, as they were called those days, which could go around the Indian peninsula to the east coast, and that's what they did. They sent her to carry out an attack on the Vikrant, but they failed, and the Ghazi herself sank. The other three were ultra-modern Daphne-class submarines, just about 1,400, 1,500 tons each, and just with a crew of about 56, but they had the best conventional torpedoes in the E-14s of the time. The best and the most accurate. We had also acquired 4 submarines by then. 3 of them were deployed during the war, the Kalveri class. But you'll be surprised to know that our orders were to positively identify and only then carry out an attack. So even though 2 of our submarines came across many merchant ships and through periscope vision realized that these merchant ships are heading towards either Karachi or Chittagong, they did not carry out an attack, because positive identification and making sure that it is not a neutral was very important. We learnt a lesson. But the Daphnes, particularly the Mangrove, one of them was, as you know, off Dewhead after having been deployed off Bombay, where it was not successful, and carried out an attack. Now, we learnt a lot of lessons from the sinking of the Kukri. This was the strength of the Pakistan Navy, because a lesser have navy in the world always goes for sea denial, whereas a superior force goes for sea control. And the peninsula only requires us to do sea control in both the seas, and we were capable of doing it. Now, we learnt a lot of lessons. The sinking of the Kukri taught us a lesson that don't go in for makeshift modifications to your sensors. We had a 170 sonar on these ships as well as on the Leopard class ships, which were given by the British. It wasn't a great sonar. And the BARC scientists were asked if you could improve upon signal processing. So they had carried out a mod kit with a naval officer sitting in BARC who finally came on Kukri and sailed. And one of the mistakes these mathematicians did was to say, in order to rule out noise and only receive signal of an echo, you have to do very slow speeds, which is a killer in anti-submarine operations. If you do slow speeds, you're asking for trouble, because the solution to the submarine is A-class.
So I started out by saying how this was one of the very few naval conflicts, one of the very few post-World War II conflicts that had a very distinct maritime element, and it's possibly the only one where both sides have deployed submarines. You've closed the loop so beautifully, Admiral Singh. Thank you so much. And thanks for this wonderful perspective of the 71 war, zooming it out, giving it the way only the Navy could say it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I must say over here that I have known Sandeep for a quarter of a century. Next year it will become a quarter of a century. The first time we met was when he came to interview me on the INS Delhi before commissioning. But I must say now that the Q&A, which was only gunned at me, is over, that you've written a wonderful book in Operation X. And I've always wondered when I read it, how did you do such deep research? And you brought out so beautifully that the Indian Jugaad was what really was in the mind of our strategy, something that Manmohan Bahadur mentioned in the last session. Right. The Jugaad over here in Operation X was really, really worth admiration.
Thank you. In fact, for those of you who are unaware of this, I'd like to play this short film on Operation X, which is the hidden aspect of the 71 war, which has never been officially acknowledged. The closest we got to it was on a float on Republic Day this year. where you had
yes.
Captain Samant
Yes.
and an exploding merchant ship.
That's right.
And this was a covert campaign that the Navy ran, the Directorate of Naval Intelligence ran from April to November of 1971, where they trained 432 combat swimmers, all from East Pakistan, Bengali boys, very talented. They were trained to carry limpet mines and attach them onto merchant ships that were sailing into East Pakistan. Towards the end of the war, they had sunk something like 100,000 tons of shipping. It's possibly never been done post the Second World War. It's a remarkable feat, and that's why I say that the Navy is a very silent service, and you really have to, they're like icebergs. You see only a tip sticking out, but beneath that, there's a lot happening. So thank you very much, sir. And
Thank you.
we'll play the video when
Thank you, Lord.
we have Admiral Shekhar Sinha joining us.
I promise to remain silent once again.
Thank you.
Shall we go there?
I'm here.
Okay.
1971. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in East Pakistan has just won an electoral mandate to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Accustomed to treating the eastern wing of the country as a colony, the military dictatorship of General Yahya Khan in West Pakistan launches a genocide against the residents of its eastern wing, flooding India with lakhs of refugees. With the violence in East Pakistan reaching a crescendo, the Indian government is faced with a difficult option: remain a mute spectator to the savagery on its eastern borders, or take action and go to war against its western neighbor.
A government which has killed more than 1 million people, which has created conditions of barbarity which I don't think the world has very seldom seen, perhaps against the Jews and Hitler.
A government of Bangladesh in exile was set up in Calcutta, even as India began training over 100,000 Mukti Bahini or liberation fighters who would fight a war of independence. Thus was born Naval Commando Operations X, comprising Indian Navy officers and divers, 8 deserters from a Pakistani submarine, and a ragtag bunch of educated but motivated Bengali youth fleeing the genocide. It was one of India's largest covert operations, meant to destabilize the West Pakistani efforts to bring East Pakistan to its knees. The naval operation was methodically planned by Navy Chief Admiral S.M. Nanda, his intelligence chief Captain M.K. Roy, and his staff officer Commander M.N.R. Samant.
That we are to recruit select youth from Bangladesh country for our operations to act as naval commandos, and they were to be trained within a matter of 3 months to launch a first attack on Pakistan shipping in Chittagong, Narayanganj, and about selected Pakistani inland and main ports of East Pakistan.
News came from the Chittagong city area that Bangladesh, some miscreants, has blown up 9 ships, and the Chittagong port has become non-operational internationally and nationally. So the Chittagong port became totally, blocked. And that is how the Pakistani lost their lifeline.
This riverine guerrilla war was unlike any seen in recent naval history. The assault swimmers disabled or sank over 100,000 tons of shipping in a 4-month campaign between August and November 1971. Bangladesh was finally liberated when the Indian Army attacked and forced the surrender of all Pakistani forces on December 16, 1971. Revealed for the first time, here is the explosive, authentic account of the covert guerrilla operation that went for the maritime jugular of Pakistan and facilitated the birth of Bangladesh.